But again, nothing's going to change. We've got to stay committed to the little things day in and day out. But excited to have another opportunity.
The small voice sliced through the murmur of the crowded community center like a blade through fog, stopping Caitlin Clark mid-sentence. She turned to see a little girl, no older than 7, standing hesitantly at the back of the group. The child's hair was neatly braided, her shoes scuffed, her oversized t-shirt hanging loosely over her slight frame. Her name was Zara Johnson, and her eyes, far too wise for her age, seemed to carry the quiet exhaustion of someone who had already seen too much. There was something almost sacred in that silence that followed, the kind of stillness that exposes truth in its most unfiltered form. Caitlin, who had come to the Des Moines Community Center that October afternoon to speak about basketball and education, had not expected this moment to become the most transformative encounter of her entire outreach work. The atmosphere until then had been bright, full of laughter and possibility. The fresh paint on the walls, the echoes of bouncing basketballs, the leftover scent of pizza from lunch, all signs of a community trying to rebuild hope. Caitlin's foundation had donated new backboards and equipment, and she'd spent the afternoon demonstrating jump shots, talking about discipline, teamwork, and the value of believing in oneself. The children sat cross-legged on the polished floor, faces glowing with admiration as they hung on every word from the woman who had become their hero. When she asked for questions, hands shot up eagerly. Some wanted to know her favorite move, others asked about college life. Everything felt warm, wholesome, and easy, until Zara's small hand rose slowly into the air, trembling slightly as if carrying the weight of something unspeakable. Caitlin smiled, expecting a question about basketball, but when she knelt to meet Zara's eyes, the girl's voice emerged, soft but piercing in its honesty. "Miss Caitlin, I don't have a question about basketball. I just wanted to tell you that I'm hungry." For a moment, time froze. The sound of the air conditioning hummed faintly above as her words rippled through the room. The other children fell silent, their expressions a mix of confusion, understanding, and shared pain. The adults, volunteers, community workers, even the local pastor, exchanged uneasy glances, their faces revealing what words could not. This wasn't an isolated confession. Caitlin felt a lump rise in her throat. She moved closer, lowering her voice. "You're hungry right now, sweetheart?" Zara nodded, her small hands twisting the hem of her shirt. "We didn't have breakfast this morning," she whispered. "And yesterday we only had crackers for dinner because Grandma said we have to wait until her check comes." The innocence with which she said it, the calm acceptance of deprivation, was more devastating than any tragedy could have been. Caitlin looked around the room and saw it then, the quiet signs she'd missed before. The hollow cheeks, the worn shoes, the restless fidgeting of children whose bodies were running on too little nourishment. It struck her how easily comfort blinds people to quiet suffering, how hunger hides in plain sight even in a world of plenty. In that instant, her role shifted. She was no longer a visiting athlete giving back to her community. She was a witness to something deeper, a hidden crisis woven into the very fabric of the neighborhood she thought she knew. "Zara," she said softly, steadying her voice, "thank you for being brave enough to tell me that. You did the right thing." Then, standing tall, she turned to the entire room, her tone filled with conviction that cut through the tension. "If one child here is hungry," she said, "then this is not just Zara's problem, it's ours. It means we have failed somewhere, and it's time to fix it together." The silence that followed was different now, charged, purposeful, alive. Later, people would say that moment changed everything. Caitlin stayed after the event, talking with the staff, the volunteers, and the parents who began sharing their own struggles with rising food prices, job insecurity, and the impossible choice between rent and meals. Within weeks, Caitlin redirected part of her foundation's funding to establish a weekend meal program for children in Des Moines, ensuring that no child who came to her camps would ever go home hungry again. Her initiative grew rapidly, partnering with local grocers, schools, and churches to create a sustainable network of support. She began using her post-game interviews and social media not just to talk about basketball, but to bring visibility to food insecurity and the dignity of care. What had begun as one child's whisper became a movement that mobilized an entire community. Caitlin often reflected later that it wasn't the applause of thousands or the bright lights of the arena that had defined her purpose. It was the quiet moment in a gymnasium when a child's courage forced her to listen with her heart. It reminded her that greatness is not only measured by points scored or trophies lifted, but by the capacity to respond to pain with empathy and action. And though she continued to dominate the courts, she carried Zara's words with her everywhere, etched into her consciousness as a sacred responsibility. For in that confession, so small, so raw, lay the
stayed within the game. That's a win in itself.
Last question, Elvin.
For a long, breathless moment, Caitlin Clark stood frozen, her mind reeling from the quiet gravity of Zara's confession. Then, almost instinctively, she asked the question that would change everything. How many other kids here are hungry right now? There was a pause, hesitant, fragile, and then, one by one, about a dozen small hands slowly rose into the air. The sight hit her harder than any loss she had ever experienced on the court. These weren't statistics from a charity report or faces on a fundraising poster. They were living, breathing children sitting right in front of her. Children who had come to learn about basketball but were silently battling hunger every single day in a nation that prided itself on abundance. Caitlin felt something shift inside her, a deep ache mixed with determination. "Okay," she said quietly, pulling out her phone, her voice trembling yet filled with resolve. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm calling every restaurant within 5 miles, and we're going to make sure every single one of you gets a hot meal right now. Not tomorrow, not next week, but today." For a heartbeat, the room was still. Then a spark of disbelief flickered into cautious hope on the children's faces as Caitlin began dialing number after number. Within half an hour, delivery drivers were arriving at the community center carrying steaming bags of food from local diners and cafes, all paid for on Caitlin's personal credit card without a moment's hesitation. As the aroma of warm meals filled the air and laughter slowly replaced silence, Caitlin watched the children eat, and an ache of realization washed over her. This was not just about feeding a few hungry mouths for one afternoon. This was a mirror held up to something much larger, a reminder of how deeply systemic inequality can hide behind everyday smiles and small acts of endurance. She sat down next to Zara, who was now happily munching on a cheeseburger, her small face glowing with joy. "You just taught me something really important," Caitlin said softly. "You showed me that sometimes the most important questions in life aren't about basketball at all." In the days and weeks that followed, Caitlin couldn't let go of what she had witnessed. Between games and travel, she began meeting with food bank directors, teachers, and social workers, uncovering the shocking scale of food insecurity in her own backyard. She learned that 1 in 6 children in Iowa faced hunger on a regular basis, that many relied almost entirely on school lunches for nutrition, and that weekends or school holidays became silent battles against empty cupboards. The more she listened, the more she understood that charity alone wasn't enough. This was about creating sustainable change. So, alongside her team, she founded the No Child Hungry program through the Caitlin Clark Foundation, an initiative designed not merely to provide food, but to restore dignity, community, and long-term stability. The program established permanent food pantries in community centers across Iowa, launched weekend backpack schemes to send meals home with children in need, and partnered with local restaurants to create emergency meal vouchers for families in crisis. But Caitlin's most innovative idea, one that made headlines across the country, was what she named Zara's Challenge. For every point she scored in a game, local businesses pledged to donate meals to hungry children, and fans could join by pledging their own contributions. Every basket, every free throw, every three-pointer now carried a tangible meaning beyond sport. It translated directly into full plates and hopeful smiles. What began as a local experiment quickly became a movement. Within 6 months, Zara's Challenge had raised over $300,000 and provided more than 100,000 meals to children throughout the Midwest. Other athletes, inspired by Caitlin's example, launched similar efforts in their own communities, and soon a wave of athlete-driven activism began spreading across the nation, uniting sports with social impact in a way that felt fresh, genuine, and profoundly human. Yet, The most powerful moment came exactly a year later when Caitlin returned to the Des Moines Community Center for the program's anniversary. The same gymnasium, once filled with hunger and silence, now buzzed with energy, laughter, and music. Banners hung from the rafters, children wore No Child Hungry t-shirts, and long tables overflowed with homemade food donated by local families. Zara was there too. Now 8 years old, taller, healthier, her braids shining under the lights, and her grandmother beaming proudly from the front row. When Zara stepped up to the microphone, the room quieted with reverent attention. "Miss Caitlin," she began, her voice clear and confident. "I want to thank you for listening to me when I was hungry, but I also want to tell you something else. I'm not hungry anymore, and neither are my friends, because you taught us it's okay to ask for help when we need it." The crowd erupted into applause, but Caitlin felt tears sting her eyes as she took the microphone again. "You know what I learned from Zara that day?" she said, her voice unsteady but full of emotion. "I learned that the most powerful thing we can do, as athletes,